Imagine a grand ballroom in the heart of New York City, where crystal chandeliers cast shimmering lights over tables laden with caviar and champagne. The air buzzed with the arrogance of old money, the kind that had built empires on generations of privilege. At the center of it all stood Elena Thompson, a striking black woman in her mid-30s, her elegant gown hugging her figure as she navigated the room with poise. She was no stranger to high society, yet on this night, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. Elena's husband, Richard Harrington, heir to the Harrington conglomerate, a sprawling empire of real estate, tech investments, and global trade worth billions, introduced her to his family with a nervous smile. His parents, Edward and Vivian Harrington, regarded her with thinly veiled disdain, their smiles never reaching their eyes. As the evening progressed, the mockery began subtly at first, whispers behind champagne flutes about her exotic background, her achievements dismissed as tokens of diversity quotas. But then, during a toast to the family's latest triumph, Edward let out a booming laugh, his voice echoing across the room. Who would have thought our Richard would bring home someone so colorful? But I suppose every empire needs a bit of charity work these days. The room erupted in laughter, the sound like shards of glass piercing Elena's composure. Vivian chimed in with a patronizing pat on Elena's hand, her words dripping with condescension about how impressive it was for someone like her to have risen so far. Elena stood there, her heart pounding, the humiliation burning like fire. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a quiet resolve forged from years of battling invisible barriers. Little did they know, Elena wasn't just Richard's wife. She was the founder of Apex Ventures, a powerhouse investment firm that had quietly funneled over $1 billion into the Harrington empire, propping up their faltering divisions. As the laughter faded, Elena's mind raced. The empire they so proudly flaunted rested on her financial lifeline. In that moment, the seeds of retribution were sown. What if the very woman they ridiculed held the power to topple it all? The night was far from over, and the real storm was just beginning to brew. Elena's journey began in the vibrant streets of Harlem, where she was born to immigrant parents from Nigeria who instilled in her an unyielding drive for excellence. Her father worked 2 jobs as a taxi driver and janitor, while her mother sewed clothes late into the night, dreaming of a better life for their only daughter. From a young age, Elena excelled in school, her sharp mind devouring books on finance and economics borrowed from the local library. Scholarships paved her way to Harvard Business School, where she graduated at the top of her class, her thesis on ethical investing earning accolades from professors who saw her potential. It was during a networking event in Boston that she met Richard. He was charming, progressive, or so he seemed, with a boyish grin and stories of traveling the world. Unlike the others in his circle, he listened when she spoke about systemic inequalities in venture capital, nodding along as if he truly understood. Their romance blossomed quickly. Stolen weekends in the Hamptons, late-night discussions about merging their worlds. Richard proposed on a yacht off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, and Elena, hopeful for a future where love transcended barriers, said yes. The Harrington family, however, was a different story. Rooted in old New England wealth, their empire traced back to the 19th century, built on industries that had historically exploited marginalized communities, textiles from southern cotton fields, real estate developments that displaced black neighborhoods during urban renewal. Edward Harrington, the patriarch, ran the company with an iron fist, his boardroom decisions often laced with outdated views. Vivian, his wife, hosted charity galas that patted themselves on the back for helping the less fortunate, yet her social circle remained exclusively white and affluent. When Elena entered their world, the undercurrents of prejudice surfaced immediately. At family dinners in their sprawling Connecticut mansion, comments about her natural hair or her urban accent were disguised as compliments. Richard's siblings, a brother and sister entrenched in the family business, viewed her as an outsider, questioning her motives in hushed tones. "Is she after the money?" they'd whisper, ignoring Elena's own success. Unbeknownst to them, Elena had built Apex Ventures from scratch. Starting with a small loan and relentless networking, she specialized in funding underrepresented entrepreneurs, turning her firm into a billion-dollar entity. When Richard confided in her about the Harrington Empire's vulnerabilities, debts from risky expansions, declining stock values, she saw an opportunity. Through Apex, she orchestrated a massive investment, $1 billion in capital infusions, structured as convertible notes and equity stakes, breathing new life into their flagging operations. The deal was presented as a partnership, but in reality, it gave Elena significant leverage over key decisions. As the marriage progressed, the family's disdain grew. They excluded her from business discussions, assuming she lacked the pedigree to contribute. Richard, caught between loyalty to his family and love for his wife, often remained silent, his passivity deepening Elena's isolation. Yet, with each slight, her curiosity about the Empire's inner workings intensified. She began quietly reviewing financial reports, noting irregularities, offshore accounts, discriminatory hiring practices that kept people of color out of leadership roles. The setup was complete, a powder keg of injustice, waiting for a spark. The tensions simmered beneath the surface for months, each incident layering on emotional weight like bricks in a wall of resentment. Elena threw herself into her work at Apex Ventures, channeling her frustrations into empowering others who faced similar barriers. Her days were filled with board meetings where she championed startups led by Black and brown founders, her passion igniting rooms full of skeptics. Yet, returning home to the Harrington estate felt like stepping into a minefield. Richard's family gatherings became arenas of subtle warfare, where racial microaggressions were wielded like weapons. One evening, during a holiday dinner, the facade cracked further. The table was set with fine china, the conversation turning to politics. Edward pontificated about meritocracy, claiming that anyone could succeed if they just worked hard enough, ignoring the systemic roadblocks Elena had overcome. When she politely interjected with facts about redlining and its lasting impact on wealth gaps, Vivian waved her off with a laugh. "Oh dear, let's not get into all that. We're all equal here." The dismissal stung, but Elena held her tongue, her mind racing with thoughts of the investment ties binding her to this toxic dynamic. As weeks turned to months, the injustices piled up. Richard's brother, Thomas, who oversaw the real estate division, casually mentioned at a brunch how they avoided certain neighborhoods for developments, code for steering clear of predominantly Black areas to maintain property values. Elena's research later revealed internal memos confirming discriminatory practices, higher interest rates for minority borrowers, overlooked applications from Black-owned businesses seeking partnerships. She felt the emotional stakes rising, her sleep interrupted by nightmares of her own past rejections. Meanwhile, the Harrington Empire flourished on the surface thanks to Elena's infusion. Stock prices soared, new acquisitions were announced, and Edward basked in media praise as a visionary leader. But Elena noticed cracks. Over-leveraged debts, ethical lapses in supply chains involving exploited labor in developing countries. She began documenting everything discreetly, her curiosity evolving into a strategic plan. At Apex, her team analyzed the Harrington portfolio, uncovering how the $1 billion had been mismanaged, funneled into vanity projects rather than sustainable growth. The emotional toll deepened when Richard's sister, Amelia, hosted a baby shower for a family friend. Elena arrived with a thoughtful gift, only to overhear whispers about her not fitting in. Amelia pulled her aside later, suggesting she tone down her advocacy work to avoid embarrassing the family. "We have an image to uphold," she said, her words echoing the racism Elena had faced in corporate America. That night, alone in her study, Elena wept silently, the isolation gnawing at her. Richard, when confronted, downplayed it as old-fashioned thinking, urging patience. But patience was a luxury she could no longer afford. As the rising action intensified, a pivotal board meeting at Harrington headquarters marked a turning point. Elena was invited as a courtesy, her role as investor downplayed. Edward presented ambitious expansion plans, seeking additional funds from Apex. During the Q&A, Elena raised concerns about diversity in leadership. The board was entirely white and male. The room fell silent, then erupted in chuckles. "We're focused on profits, not politics," Edward retorted, his laughter joined by others. Humiliated, Elena excused herself, her hands trembling as she left. This incident fueled her determination. She delved deeper into the Empire's history, uncovering archived documents about the family's involvement in discriminatory housing policies decades ago, practices that had displaced families like her own. The emotional stakes soared. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was a reckoning with generational injustice. At home, arguments with Richard escalated, his defense of his family straining their marriage. He accused her of overreacting, blind to the privilege shielding him. Elena's network of allies grew. She confided in mentors from her Harvard days, Black executives who shared similar stories of corporate racism. They advised caution but encouraged her to use her leverage. Meanwhile, the Harringtons continued, their empire building, announcing a merger that would consolidate power but required Elena's approval on the investment terms. Tensions peaked at a gala fundraiser, where Vivian introduced Elena as our little diversity hire. The crowd's laughter a chorus of complicity. Elena smiled through it, but inside, resolve hardened. Months later, an audit revealed fraud. Embezzlement. In the tech division, covered up by Edward's cronies. Elena's team at Apex flagged it, giving her the ammunition needed. The injustice revealed wasn't just racial, it was systemic corruption enabled by unchecked power. Emotional exhaustion set in. Elena questioned her marriage, her place in this world. But curiosity about what lay beyond the Empire's shadow kept her going. She began preparing contingency plans, consulting lawyers on unwinding the investment without personal loss. The buildup reached fever pitch during a family vacation in Aspen. Snow blanketed the mountains, but the atmosphere inside the chalet was icy. Over dinner, Edward boasted about outmaneuvering competitors, hinting at underhanded tactics. When Elena challenged him on ethics, he exploded in mockery. "Stick to your little firm, dear. This is real business." The room's laughter sealed it. That night, staring at the stars, Elena made her decision. The Empire's foundation was rotten, built on exclusion and exploitation. Pulling the investment wouldn't just be revenge, it would be justice. As the action rose, Elena's internal conflict deepened. She loved Richard, but his family's poison threatened to consume her. Secret meetings with her board plotted the withdrawal, ensuring minimal fallout for innocent employees. The stakes were emotional and financial. Failure could tarnish her reputation. Yet, each revelation of injustice, discriminatory firings, biased promotions, fueled her. The tension built like a storm, ready to break. The climax unfolded in the gleaming conference room of Harrington headquarters, a space symbolizing the Empire's might with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. Elena arrived unannounced, her presence requested for what Edward believed was a routine update on the investment. The board assembled, suits crisp and expressions confident, unaware of the tempest approaching. Richard sat beside his father, his face a mask of unease, sensing something amiss from Elena's distant demeanor in recent weeks. Elena took her seat at the head of the table, a position she had earned through her financial clout but rarely claimed. She began calmly, presenting slides from Apex's latest audit. The room shifted uncomfortably as she revealed discrepancies, inflated valuations, hidden liabilities, and evidence of discriminatory practices in hiring and partnerships. Whispers turned to murmurs. Edward interrupted with a forced laugh, dismissing it as minor oversights. But Elena pressed on, her voice steady, unveiling the embezzlement trail leading to high-level executives. Tension thickened like fog. Richard's eyes widened in realization, pleading silently for mercy. Elena paused, letting the weight settle. Then, with measured precision, she announced Apex's decision: immediate withdrawal of the $1 billion investment. The room erupted in chaos. Gasps, protests, Edward slamming his fist on the table. "You can't do this," he roared, his face reddening. But Elena could, and she did. The convertible notes allowed for clawback clauses triggered by ethical violations, clauses she had insisted upon during the initial deal. As the intensity peaked, Elena laid out the consequences. Without the funds, the Empire's over-leveraged divisions would collapse. Stock prices would plummet. Creditors would call in loans, and the merger would fail. She cited specific instances of racial injustice, emails rejecting black candidates, policies favoring white suppliers, to justify the move as not just financial, but moral. The board's arrogance crumbled. Some shifted blame, others begged for negotiation. Richard stood, torn, but Elena's gaze held firm, a silent indictment of his complicity. The dramatic peak came when Edward, in a desperate bid, hurled insults, his laughter now hysterical and broken. "You think you can take us down? You're nothing without us." But Elena rose, her presence commanding. She revealed her own empire's resilience, how Apex would redirect the funds to ethical ventures, empowering those the Harringtons had overlooked. The room fell silent, the empire's fragility exposed. In that intense moment, years of built-up tension released, Elena's humiliation avenged, the injustice confronted head-on. As she left the building, the weight lifted, replaced by empowerment. The climax wasn't just the announcement, it was the shattering of illusions, the empire teetering on the brink. In the aftermath, the Harrington empire unraveled swiftly, like a tapestry pulled by a single thread. Stock prices dove 60% within days, headlines screaming of financial scandal and leadership failures. Creditors swarmed, forcing asset sales, the Connecticut mansion, private jets, overseas properties. Edward stepped down in disgrace, his reputation tarnished by investigations into the fraud Elena had exposed. Vivian retreated from social circles, her galas canceled amid whispers of hypocrisy. Richard's siblings scrambled for jobs outside the family fold, their privileges stripped away. Elena, meanwhile, navigated the fallout with grace. Her marriage to Richard ended amicably but inevitably. He chose his family's side in the end, unable to bridge the chasm. Free from the toxicity, she thrived. Apex Ventures soared, the redirected $1 billion fueling initiatives for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Black-owned startups flourished under her guidance, creating jobs and wealth in communities long neglected. Media lauded her as a trailblazer, her story inspiring TED Talks and articles on corporate accountability. The broader impact rippled outward. The Harrington collapse sparked industry-wide reckonings. Companies audited their diversity practices, fearing similar exposures. Advocacy groups used the case to push for legislation against discriminatory business tactics, citing Elena's evidence as a catalyst. In Harlem, where her roots lay, scholarships in her name helped young black women pursue finance careers, closing the loop on her own journey. Emotionally, Elena found peace. The humiliation that once burned now fueled her advocacy, turning pain into purpose. She traveled, speaking at conferences about the hidden costs of racism in boardrooms, her words resonating with audiences worldwide. Friendships deepened with those who shared her experiences, forming a network of resilience. Yet the resolution wasn't without reflection. Elena pondered the human cost, employees affected by the downfall, though she had mitigated it by prioritizing ethical wind-downs. The empire's crumble served as a cautionary tale. Privilege unchecked breeds downfall. In the end, what if standing against injustice isn't just survival, but the path to true empire building? Elena's story challenges us. How many more hidden? Battles must be fought before equality becomes the foundation, not the exception. Reflect on your own circles. Does silence enable the same? Share your thoughts below. Let's build a world where no one is laughed at for who they are.